Three, two, one. This is Dateline News and Conversations. I've got a great show tonight with a very fascinating person, a good friend. She is a former CIA analyst. She is an activist. She goes around getting arrested. We're going to talk to her about all of this tonight. Going to ask her some questions about, as an analyst, what is going on right now with the Trump administration, with his attempt to streamline, maybe that's putting politely, the national security agencies. My guest tonight, Elizabeth Murray. Elizabeth, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you again, Regis.
So, Elizabeth, everybody, when they look at you and I tell them that you're a former career CIA analyst, I think they're going to have a hard time believing that. But how did you, before we go on to other things and doing some analysis, how did you see your role as a career CIA analyst? Not an operative, an analyst.
Well, I felt that as an editor, as a political and media analyst, I felt that I was performing a public service, basically. Our job was to review translated news, including from TASS and Krasnaya Spetsa, the Red Star. And we used to review all the Soviet media, as well as the speeches from Gorbachev and before him, Chernenko, Yuri Andropov, the Russian leaders. And we would provide the full text to the policymakers so they could see in detail what the Russian leaders were saying. Our job was to help them in their policy making. And then the analysis side, which I graduated into later on in my career, after perhaps the first 15 years or so, was to summarize media editorials and basically the editorial line of prominent media from various countries. I dealt with Soviet Russia and Eastern Europe, and then I moved into Middle Eastern countries, and I ended up being in charge of Iraqi media. And so I felt as a political analyst, I was performing a public service, not only to policymakers, Regis, but also to academia that at that time they had access. Our open source analyses and material at some level used to be available via the World News Service to university libraries by scholarship. And it was a tool also used by analysts in the State Department as they formulated their foreign policy strategies and such. Now, unfortunately, Jim Clapper, back when he was head of the DNI, the Directorate of National Intelligence, he stopped that. He now made the open source feed that we had supplied to the policymakers that used to be available to academics. He shut that off. So now it's classified and it's no longer available to the public. But for a long time, we were very proud of our work, and it was well received in all the different agencies of the US government and in academia.
All right. Now, you are a member of VIPS, Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, co-founded by our dear friend Ray McGovern and others. Um, what's the purpose of VIPS, and do you really have any influence with current President Trump, with Biden before him, uh, with Barack Obama, with Bush? Um, I know that you send official policy letters to the president, but do you think you're being heard? And what is the purpose of VIX?
Well, the purpose of VIPS, and it was founded in the run-up to the U.S. war on Iraq, which happened, as you know, in March of 2003. And by the way, I did not join VIPS until I retired in 2010. But since back in, I believe it was November 2002 or thereabouts, or perhaps a bit later on, but ahead of the war, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity issued their very first memorandum to President Bush advising him to widen his circle of advisors to get better advice because they were not trusting that the folks close to them. The VIPs were not trusting, for example, the Office of Special Plans inside the Pentagon, which was consisted of Douglas Feith and Wolfowitz and company that were basically trying to steer U.S. policy and sort of increase the drumbeat for war. And VIPs are all retired intelligence professionals, and in that one memo, they were very concerned about this, sort of seemingly inexorable drive to war, which did happen, and they have since then tried very hard to influence policymakers through these memoranda that are public. It's very hard to find them because obviously they won't be touched by the mainstream media. But since then, they've been published in consortium news. Now, I do have one success story for sure. Under the first Trump administration, the VIPs were actually summoned to Langley. I think by Trump's directive. I think they were a group of them. I think Bill Binney certainly was summoned by Pompeo to brief him. So there has been, that was one sort of indicator that we were being heard. And I think there are extraordinary efforts made to make sure that policymakers do have a personal copy of the VIPS memos. And fortunately, some of our people, especially on the operations side, still have some reach into the agency. So, I think we are heard as far as actually listening to our what we say and whether they act on it. That's kind of a mystery, but it hasn't stopped the VIPs from giving up. And I think we have built up a measure of gravitas and respect in the intelligence community in general. I think people know who we are, and try to get our message up as high as possible. But of course, we don't have any real power. So it's basically we do what we can, and we do have quite a storehouse of knowledge and expertise. So we try to leverage that as we can.
Yeah. Do you think that intelligence has been politicized? Do you think that maybe people around the president have kept important analysis from the presidents?
Oh, very much so. And this became clear to me, Regis, in the run-up to the war against Iraq in 2003. I mean, I myself received calls from Wolfowitz's Office of Special Plans asking me to search in Iraqi media for a link between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. And repeatedly, I told them there was no evidence of this. I mean, I was able to reach out to our office in the Middle East and have them go through all the media material and archives and such. And I think I went back to Wolfowitz's office on 3 separate occasions confirming that there was no link. But it didn't seem to bother them. They continued to trumpet this link in the mainstream media, primarily in Fox News and their media outlets. And so those of us on the inside who tried to provide the proper information, I think it's quite certain that some of that information never did make its way to the president, or if it did, there was already an agenda being railroaded, and it didn't seem to matter what the facts were. So that was very, very discouraging to me. And it really opened my eyes to the sort of machine that exists in terms of uh, significant lobbies. I mean, we all know that the Office of Special Plans was very close to the Israeli agenda. We have General Wesley Clark, who told us that there was a plan to basically launch a coup in seven countries in the Middle East, starting with Iraq and Syria and Libya and Lebanon and so on. And you know, I don't know how that has benefited the United States except to leak or leach trillions of dollars from our budget. It has certainly benefited Israel. So, and this has been a foreign policy issue in our country for a long time now.
I'm glad you brought that up. Um, I have used General Wesley Clark's video on YouTube several times, um, relating the policy, the plans of the United States government to take down 7 countries in the Middle East. The one who is left standing now appears to be Iran. And I'm not a CIA analyst. I'm not an expert by any means, but I've been reading the news. Russia and China have formed very strong relations with Iran, which has to be sending a very strong message to Washington and to Israel. What are your thoughts on what's evolving on that geopolitical level?
Well, as the U.S. moves away from its involvement in Ukraine, very thankfully, I must say, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm very grateful to President Trump for, that he is uh, working with President Putin to end this. At the same time, we know that in the United States, there is a military industrial complex that is always in search of enemies. And I'm very concerned about when now that we're stopping the process of sending weaponry and such to Ukraine, they're now searching for a new outlet to sell their weapons. And I'm sure that Israel has certainly for a long time put pressure on the United States to attack Iran, and has even declared several times that they're going to attack Iran unilaterally. So this alliance made by Moscow and Beijing with the leadership in Iran is a very important deterrent. And I'm actually very grateful for it for the sake of averting a World War III and an end to humanity. I don't know whether Americans are aware of the huge existential threat war with Iran poses. Now, perhaps the Trump administration does. Trump does not seem to be in a hurry to attack Iran. And very recently, he sent an envoy to dialogue individually with Hamas, which set Israel off. And the envoy actually stated publicly, we're the United States of America. We are not Israel's agent. Now, I hope, I mean, that's a very promising sign. We don't know where that's going, but I hope that this administration continues to move along the lines of American interests first, not Israel's interests first. There is no interest, we have no interest at all from the standpoint of US policy to attack Iran. Iran has not attacked the United States, certainly not on US soil. And it's been Israel, I think with the help of the United States, that's been assassinating Iranian nuclear scientists and basically stirring up trouble in Iran. So I really hope that common sense prevails. I am grateful that China and Russia are the adults in the room. President Trump is more of a transactional leader rather than anyone based on political ideology. So I think if he sees that it's not in his best interest, that there are no gains from it, perhaps that can be avoided. But Israel, as we know, is always a wild card. As Norman Finkelstein likes to remind us, it's a lunatic state. It certainly acts that way, and it's very dangerous. Look at what's happening in Syria right now. Syria is rapidly becoming another Libya, a war zone. with various factions and massacres taking place. And it's my understanding that the surviving Alawites have now taken refuge in the Russian compound in Latakia. So, I'm very glad that the Russians have remained there, and perhaps they can provide some sanctuary. But I hope, as far as Iran is concerned, that common sense prevails.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that analysis of what's going on in Syria and Iran in the Middle East. I want to go back to the United States and Russia. Now, I'm talking to you as a former CIA analyst. Now, as I look at what has happened since Donald Trump took office, he's done a number of things that are very concerning, very alarming. But the one thing that he's done was he made that telephone call to Putin. It was not Putin who made the call to Trump. Trump made the call to Putin. And then Marco Rubio, very shortly thereafter, made the call to Sergei Lavrov. And a high-level meeting was very rapidly organized for Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, where Rubio and others met with Sergei Lavrov and others. Out of that came a lot of hysteria, a lot of hope and expectations in the mainstream and the alternative media. But the one thing for me that was more significant than anything was the reopening of direct contact between the United States and Russia at the highest levels. And the promise to continue meeting on various levels to solve some problems. And Elizabeth, what came out of that meeting was a determination to reopen embassies and consulates in the United States and Russia and to allow them to be fully staffed. I said at the time, this represented a giant step back from the brink of nuclear war. Now, Trump has done a number of other things. On the one hand, he said, maybe I'm going to take away sanctions from Russia. And then the other day, I think yesterday or the day before, he threatened he was going to put more sanctions on Russia to force them to come to an agreement with the Ukraine. And Elizabeth, we got to be real about this. This is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. This has been a war between the United States and Russia that predates the coup in 2014. Now, as an analyst, if you were doing the daily intel report to Trump, what would you be telling him?
Well, first of all, I would be praising what you just mentioned, which is highly praising the resumption of dialogue with the Russians. As you said, I mean, that is a huge step back from the nuclear brink. And I honestly am very optimistic because I think that as long as there is dialogue, all of these issues, including the issue of sanctions, can be resolved. I mean, it was really, I have to say, it was absolutely I don't know what word I can use, execrable or just deplorable, that there was like a total absence of dialogue under the Biden administration, and that was so dangerous. So I would encourage Trump to resume dialogue on multiple levels, not just political, but cultural and artistic, and roll back this Russophobia that exists in this country. I mean, we would have to find ways to get the media on board because, unfortunately, in the United States, there's still this really rabid fear of Russia that is whipped up by our media. So this has to stop. I mean, as we all know, Russiagate was just a toxic farce, and yet because of the propaganda, it's still believed by a large chunk of Americans. So I do worry a little bit about Trump because he'll move forward and you'll think, oh, everything is going to be great. I mean, that happened under Trump 1, the first administration. There were positive moves toward Russia. And then he ended up being sort of really attacked in the media, for being a Putin lover or something, and he ended up in implementing really horrible sanctions on Russia. And of course, who knows if that will happen again? I mean, Trump is in his second term. I think he has a little bit more leeway to do what he wants to do. And at the same time, he seems to be, beholden, as all presidents are, to the military industrial complex and to the forces that still lust after Russia's natural resources, that still lust after, American domination of everything. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, despite the moves toward peace, look at Western Europe that is still sort of pushing for war, and there are still many elements in the U.S. administration that are not happy at all with Trump's move to end those hostilities. So I would simply advise Trump to continue talking to send Rubio to talk with Sergei Lavrov, and I really believe that dialogue with Russian leaders and some of the foreign policy people there that are so skilled and knowledgeable will solve a lot of these issues. And perhaps I'm being overly optimistic.
All right. Well, I'm going to challenge you a little bit. Trump
Okay.
Trump was bragging during the run up to his election that he would solve the Ukraine war on day one. We're already 6 weeks out, and it's still not solved. And some of his people, Rubio and Waltz and others, are saying, well, but we didn't say what year. uh, he hasn't solved it. And we saw that incredible debacle that took place in the Oval Office uh, 2 weeks ago on Friday, when that argument boiled over. Trump kicked Zelensky out of the White House, said he's not ready for peace. And in these days that have followed, it seems that Trump is trying to put more pressure on Ukraine, but he's also seemingly trying to put pressure on Putin by saying, you know what? I'm going to put more sanctions on you. Here's my question to you, Elizabeth, because I've already made up my mind. I don't think Trump holds the cards to make a deal with Russia on Ukraine. Now, I have my reasons for that, and I think they're pretty valid. But what are your thoughts? Does Trump really hold the cards? Does he have any leverage or influence to make Russia concede something in this metaphorical game of cards?
I don't think so. I think the war has already been won by Russia. That's why it's so sad that it continues to drag on, because all that's happening is more lives are being lost on both sides. I don't think he has the leverage. I see that. And let me just clarify your question. You're asking me whether I think Trump has any cards in terms of being able to influence Putin. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes. So no, because I mean, saying I think Russia has learned to get around the sanctions. I mean, when I visited Russia and I went to 6 different cities, including Krasnodar and Crimea and Sevastopol and Moscow and St. Petersburg. I mean, I could witness the prosperity in Russia and see how well they were doing. And they were working overtime to get around the sanctions. They were growing their own cucumbers so they didn't have to import them from Turkey. And, there are also moves, although you don't hear about it so much anymore, there's not as much use of the US dollar anymore. Many of the transactions are happening in Chinese and Russia currency. Look what's happened in Saudi Arabia with the petrodollar, it's washed its hands of that. So, the United States does not have the influence that it once had. And I think it's still acting like a superpower, but in many practical terms, we're already a multipolar world, whether, Trump wants to admit it or not. And again, this is very sad, though, that the Ukraine war is going to drag on because, after his humiliation in Washington, he was, as you know, received with great fanfare at 10 Downing Street. And Macron and the Germans, I believe, have also pledged some support. So, the Western Europeans apparently think that, after these years of war with the United States involvement, that suddenly, without the US, that they're going to win this war. This is really very sad because Western Europe is going to deplete its resources, and Ukraine is going to end up as a very small rump state with none of the territories that it had before. So yeah, this is kind of a really losing proposition for the U.S. to try to think that it has any cards at all at this point.
Yeah. And, Trump has been, I'm going to be a little crude here. He's been pissing off the Europeans. They are flabbergasted between being flabbergasted and angered and dismissed as non-relevant. Now you hear SS von der Leyen, Macron, and Keimer from Great Britain, from the UK, puffing their chest out. They want to spend 800 billion euros on remilitarizing, which is money they don't have. But they've really been dismissed by Trump, including NATO. And I think they're in trouble. Now, if I could present Trump with a national security update, I would want to whisper into his ear, Donald, get out of this Ukraine war while you can. You've been saying for months it's Joe Biden's war. If you don't get out of this, it becomes yours. What would you tell him?
I mean, I would say more or less the same thing. I don't think that there are no U.S. interests involved in continuing this war with Ukraine. And I think that Trump feels the same way, but again, Trump is not the blob. Trump is not the military industrial complex that has been profiting handsomely. I just protested in front of Raytheon, which has been sending its missiles to Ukraine, and I'm sure they're desperately now searching for who are we going to send our missiles to now? So there are many forces at work around him, and that is I think that's the reality of the presidency in the United States. Is whether it's a Biden or a Trump. There are limitations on what they can do. So I really hope that Trump and his team can stand firm. And as far as Europe is concerned, I mean, they're already in bad shape. I mean, they allowed the United States to destroy the Nord Stream pipeline. And, so why are they complaining now? They should have complained a long time ago. They've already allowed themselves to be undermined and to be used. And maybe they feel the rug has been pulled out from under them, but that happened a long time ago, since Nord Stream. So I feel bad for them because they really need to take care of their economies and their people. And by militarizing, they're just going to turn themselves into a bunch of medieval barbarians. I mean, you can imagine how miserable life is going to be for the citizens of these countries that have chosen to militarize. You're right. I mean, they can ill afford it. And, by pouring it into Ukraine, it's just a black hole. And these are Russia's neighbors. I mean, these are the folks that need to be reaching out to Russia even more than the United States. I mean, we're on the other side of the Atlantic. They had a very productive relationship with Russia. Certainly, Germany did for many years under Realpolitik. And there's no reason for them to be adversarial with Russia. It's so counterproductive for their citizens and their economies. So I don't understand this. And as far as NATO itself, I don't understand why it still exists. I mean, it exists seemingly only to act as a provocateur towards Russia. And if the United States would be smart, it would withdraw all its nuclear capable missiles from Poland and the Baltics and all the places where it fantasizes about launching into Russia, although they like to tell everybody, oh no, these are not for Russia, it's for Iran. But I mean, we all know otherwise. And I think that would be, just a wonderful confidence building measure. And I would definitely whisper that in Trump's ear if I could.
Yeah. You mentioned in Trump 1.0, the first administration, 2018, July 16th, Trump met Putin in Helsinki. It was a love fest. Oh, everything was going to change. That press conference when they finished the meeting was incredible. I downloaded, I still watch this thing. And no sooner, I mean, Trump didn't even make it back to his Air Force One to return to America before Lindsey Graham, John McCain, the New York Post, the New York Times, the Washington Post were all calling him Putin's poodle. We're all calling him treasonous, accusing him of committing treason and selling out the United States. And within days, there was a 180-degree shift. Now, at the time, I said, did somebody show him a silver bullet with his name on it? Did operatives from the blob, from the deep state, from the military-industrial complex convene a meeting in the office and tell him, look, dude, this is not what's going to happen? And he changed. Now, we're in Trump 2.0. I'd like to think he's smarter. I'd like to think he's got some pretty tough people around him. At times, with some of the things that he's doing and some of the things that he's saying, he seems to not care about those influencers that were present in his first administration. I can only hope so. But, Elizabeth, I have to ask you now. I want to ask you some questions about the current national security state. He appointed Tulsi Gabbard to be the head of the NSA. He's got people in the CIA, the FBI, and the Pentagon who seem to be dismantling some of previous administrations. I mean, I'm hearing things of hundreds of people being laid off from the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Administration. What is your take on what Trump is trying to do?
Well, it's very confusing because yes, I mean, from my vantage point, and and I think I told you I don't follow domestic politics as closely as I follow foreign policy. I think it's because I've spent half my life living abroad. But from what I can tell, I mean, there has been this massive purge of people considered to not be loyal to the Trump administration. It seems that Trump's priority is to fill the agencies with, maybe you might call them yes men, or people who are loyal. And he seems to value that more than, say, career civil servants who have expertise. And I think he's surrounded himself with such people. I think that's a little dangerous. And I think we've seen that since he's implemented these massive purges, not just from top people in the intelligence agencies, but from the federal government. Apparently, a lot of people that were let go were actually people who were responsible for keeping our nuclear weapons safe and such like that. I mean, I think that Elon Musk, who, by the way, as we all know, was not elected, has this new Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, he's been letting so many people go indiscriminately in the government, claiming to just be getting rid of waste and excessive people. And I think to a certain extent, some of these people have had to come back in. I mean, I think that some of these policies have not had a lot of forethought and have just been sweeping. But in terms of the people in the intelligence agencies, I think he wants people close to him, loyal to him. Tulsi Gabbard, by the way, I think is an inspired choice in some respects. I mean, she's certainly been right about the U.S. the strange U.S. policy on Syria. Especially with the supposed chemical attack in Duma back in, I believe it was 2018, which was totally a put-up job. I mean, it has been shown that the inspectors that went there did not see any real evidence of a chemical attack by the Syrian government. And Tulsi Gabbard, to her credit, acknowledged that and bucked the government line. Now, it will remain to be seen how she is inside the government. She was outside at the time. And she's also very, very pro-Zionist, which to me is very alarming. Very much of an Israel loyalist. So that's not necessarily something that aligns with U.S. interests. So we'll have to see. Only time will tell how these people will work out.
Yeah, you make a very good point. A lot of these people are supporting Trump in terms of Ukraine, where previously, no, they were all gung ho. But people have been pointing out, how can you reconcile people being opposed to the war in Ukraine and approving of the genocide that's taking place in Palestine and Gaza, 100% supported openly by the United States? That's very difficult for me and a lot of other people to swallow. Your thoughts?
Well, indeed. And I really wish that Trump would just take that $100 million that Miriam Adelson gave him for his election campaign, just return it to her and say, thank you very much, but no thank you. I mean, Trump is a wealthy person in his own right. I don't think he needs that money. I don't think we need to be beholden to Israel. And Trump was elected on an American first platform. And a huge number of Arab Americans in states like Michigan voted for Trump precisely because they abhorred the Biden administration's pro-genocide policy that was embodied in Kamala Harris. And that was the reason why nobody wanted her in the White House. So it's been very, very disillusioning to watch Trump talking about turning Gaza into a Riviera, and to watch as the administration does nothing, as Israel cuts off all food, water, and electricity to the surviving population in Gaza, which is, if for nothing else, these people are all heroes. They've endured 15 months of genocide. When there was a ceasefire, thanks to the Trump envoy Witkoff, Trump showed that he can do it. He's capable of enforcing the ceasefire, and he has the power to make sure that Israel implements the second phase of it. He's simply choosing not to. On the other hand, he sent an envoy to talk directly to Hamas, which has really annoyed Israel because Israel likes to be in charge and it's very afraid of a unilateral U.S. Hamas dialogue. I think we should continue that dialogue and really proceed, in accordance with American interests, with United, and I should never say American because America encompasses Central and South America, but in consonant with U.S. interests. That's what Trump was elected for. America first, not Israel first. And, I think that we need to keep up the pressure around the world to persuade Trump that it is not in his interest. And actually, if we look at Israeli interests, look at the exodus from that country. Look at the brain drain. Anybody with half a brain doesn't want to hang around to see Armageddon or World War III happening there. We have this problem in this country, Regis, with the Christian Zionists. Apparently, there are more of them than actual Jewish Zionists, and they have been totally brainwashed to promote this genocide. So, my big hope is that the younger generation in the United States has really been transformed. The campuses, despite the repression, are still on fire with their anti-genocide protests. This has to continue. The resistance has to continue, and it's very, very concerning. Trump makes these grandiose statements, and in the end, we never really know which way he's going to turn. He's very unpredictable. So I really don't know what to think of where he's going on this, but I really hope that he moves away from the Israel first policy.
Yeah. And you and I will stay in touch on what is unfolding in the Middle East, because for so much of your life, you were an expert on that region. To say that Trump is unpredictable, that's an understatement. Or maybe he's really knows what he wants to do, but he's not revealing the real agenda. I think we're being entertained by an incredible spectacle, which is not being controlled by Donald Trump or anybody from the EU, but being controlled by, as of now, some unseen and unidentified forces or individuals. Elizabeth, do you think that what Trump really is looking for from the national security or agencies is trust? Do you think that he has not trusted them in the past? Do you think that he's felt betrayed? And by surrounding himself with so many people that, as you said, are loyal to him, he feels that he will be getting accurate national security briefings.
Well, I worry about this. I think he does feel that he has been betrayed, particularly on the whole Russiagate business. And this, I think he did feel sabotaged and mousetrapped when he came back from that Helsinki meeting the first year. What worries me, though, is whenever you have loyalists, you end up having people who tell the president perhaps what he wants to hear. And this is the danger. And the whole idea behind the Central Intelligence Agency was to be able to advise the president with, as Ray McGovern likes to say, without fear or favor, to tell him both what he wanted to hear and what he doesn't want to hear. That's what it was supposed to be, was dispassionate advice and sort of impartial counsel. And I don't know if he's going to get that now. I hope that he does. I hope that the people who are Trump loyalists also realize that it's in the president's best interest to have just the facts, ma'am, or just the facts, sir. That's really, really important. And of course, intelligence, I've witnessed it myself, as I told you before, intelligence can be politicized. And we've seen what's happened with that, with the war in Iraq. which cost many, many Iraqi lives as well as American lives. And I would hate to see a repeat of that in Iran, God forbid. So it's really, really important to have unbiased information. And I don't know what you're going to have with political appointees. I also worry about the surveillance state. I worry about what Elon Musk is doing. I worry about J.D. Vance's association with Peter Thiel and Stratcom or Stratfor, sorry, with the big AI industry and what this is going to mean for Americans' domestic freedom. Is everything we say and type and read going to be known to the surveillance state? And what is this going to do to our civil liberties? I think probably I worry disproportionately about Trump's foreign policy, but we need to also not lose sight of American domestic freedoms. AI is extremely dangerous, and it seems like it's doing the thinking now for a lot of Americans. And if it starts going into schools, what's going to happen to the critical thinking skills of people if everything is dictated to us by Chat GPT or Grok or whatever it is that people now go to for analysis? I see it as a very dangerous trend. And unfortunately, I think the commercial interests for AI are very much infiltrating the Trump administration. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but just that even that very concept is very concerning to me.
Yeah, well, artificial intelligence, it's technocracy, it's this surveillance state, it's digital transformation. All of this is part and parcel of the goals and agenda of the World Economic Forum, the UN Agenda 2030. It's very clear. They're not making a secret out of it, but people have to look at it carefully and examine where it is we're going. And I am very concerned about this digital transformation that will include facial recognition. It can take your temperature when you walk into a room to know if you have a fever, to know if you've got COVID, a virus. They can pull up anything that is digitally stored about any of us. And this is exactly what Edward Snowden warned us about when he walked away from the NSA. He said, don't think that you have nothing to hide. It isn't really about anything to hide. It's they will have everything known about you. And do you really want to trust any government with having all of that private information that it can use for nefarious purposes? I don't. I don't want to live in that kind of a world of surveillance, a world of control. Uh, and I think that's where we're heading. Now, I want to shift gears. You went and got yourself arrested down in Tucson, Arizona. Now, I have to tell you, and I can't say that I'm ashamed because I really didn't know what I was doing at the time. I was desperate for a job. I went to work for a small company in Phoenix, Arizona, that was supplying materials for the military industrial complex in Arizona. Among them were Motorola at the time, Raytheon. And I called on these companies. I took a job as a manufacturer's representative. I was trying to let these companies know about the services that this small company could provide. Little did I really know at the time, honestly, what I was doing. This was back in the 80s. And I really wasn't aware where these missiles were going, uh, where this technology was going. But At the time, there were no protests outside the gates of Motorola, outside the gates of Raytheon, and other military industrial companies in Arizona, of which there were quite a few. I didn't come aware of that until many, many years later, when living back in my home state of Maine, friends of mine like Bruce Gagnon were protesting and getting arrested at Bath Iron Works that were manufacturing Aegis missile cruisers to go around the world and kill people. It was only then that I really became aware of what this military industrial complex was all about. It was only then that I became aware of how it worked. And how it worked is it provided jobs in every state in the United States, which is why every elected congressman or senator was going to protect those jobs in their state. Many of my friends got arrested. I was always behind a camera documenting it, and I was in the courtroom documenting their many trials. Now, you, a patriotic American, you went down to Arizona from California to stir up some trouble. You got yourself arrested. Tell me about it.
Well, it's very much like you just said. I mean, you're right. I mean, there are a lot of defense contractors in Arizona, and unfortunately, in a city like Tucson, I believe that Raytheon is actually the largest employer in that whole city. I think they employ about 13,000 people. And back in 2000, I believe that Raytheon won a $2 billion contract for the manufacture of nuclear cruise missiles. And I believe that contract has the capacity to expand to about a $10 billion contract, what with mission creep and other weapons and such that that it manufactures. But it is a huge employer in the area, and you can't really blame people for working there. I mean, they have to support their families. And I noticed I went to the went to the Raytheon website. They don't heavily market what when they're trying to recruit, they don't heavily market what they actually produce, which are weapons that kill people. They heavily market the sunny lifestyle in Tucson, you know, the wonderful weather, the wonderful nature, the hiking, etc. And they also have an agreement with Johns Hopkins University right there in Tucson, where they sponsor a particular program of study such that they're able to nurture. It's almost like, you know, a small hatchery for Raytheon engineers, where they're able to train just the kind of people they want and funnel them into the jobs in Raytheon. So they really have an economic bubble there, which is, you know, quite a hold on it. And when I did this action, I was very clear to the security officials that were trying to detain us initially. We were first detained by Raytheon security before the sheriff came in. And I remember telling the Raytheon security, you know, we have nothing against the people that work here. You know, I myself was once a government employee in a very sinister agency. We all have to eat. It's the weapons that our opposition goes to. And that seemed to change his expression when I said that. You know, everybody is a human being. They have to make choices, and not all of us can make the same kinds of choices. So when our Pacific Life Community group went to protest on Ash Wednesday, last Wednesday, you know, our signs were very much focused on the weapons and what these weapons do to innocents, whether they be in the Donbass region of Russia, or, you know, in Gaza, or in Sudan or Somalia, or wherever else the U.S. seeks to enforce its control. And we had about 40 people carrying signs in front of Raytheon, and there were just three of us that made the decision to risk arrest. And even one of the three decided to walk back to join the others. So there ended up just being two of us. And we walked pretty much unchallenged against the traffic. We were on the side where the people were going out holding a sign, and we ended up kneeling down and praying at a point when a barrier, kind of like the barriers that go down when a train is passing by, was lowered directly in front of us. But it also protected us from oncoming traffic. The cars were going around and not directly into our path. So we recited a Lord's Prayer in honor of Ash Wednesday and in repentance for the missiles that go to kill people around the world. And we were approached by security, and they challenged us and asked us to move to the side of the road, which we were not prepared to do. So he then came and said, "Would you mind if I put security cones around you?" So we were able to stand there, and there were just these security cones. Then we realized, well, they really have us where they want us, don't they? And this is not enough. We really wanted to make more of a direct action. So when they thought that they had effectively corralled us, and they weren't looking, John and I, John Hyde, who was the other resistor, we sort of left our little sanctuary and went around the barrier and started to move forward. And at that point, we were basically pounced on. Three security vehicles immediately came around us and stopped us. And they said, "All right, now we're calling the police. You're going to jail." And they pushed us off to the side. But strangely enough, Regis, they did not prevent us from continuing to hold the sign, which I think you'll see in one of the pictures said, Raytheon nukes will reduce us all to ashes, in a reference to Ash Wednesday, but also a reference to Hiroshima. I think you said you had a photo of that. But we had this wonderful reception from the employees going in and out. They were all kind of looking to see what the commotion was about. And we had so many of them, Regis, waving to us, signs of solidarity and support. We were flabbergasted. And the authorities were, as we waited, they were not preventing us from continuing to hold this sign. So we took advantage of that. And I'm not used to that. I mean, I've been arrested multiple times in Bangor, not Bangor, Maine, but Bangor Base in Washington State, where the 8 Trident nuclear missiles are stationed. And the first thing they do is they remove our sign. They remove our banners so that the employees don't have the chance to see what this is all about. So we could see that there was solidarity there. And then when the sheriff's deputies arrived, he launched into what I would only describe as a military style psyop. He tried to convince us that we were totally ineffectual, that we were silly to want to try to get arrested. And he kept saying, well, you have a chance to walk away now. You won't be arrested, and you'll be much more effective if you join your friends down there outside the Raytheon compound. You're not having an impact here. And he literally asked us, "Do you think you're going to change the minds of anyone in there?" And of course, I know several former employees of the base up in Naval Base Kitsap Bangor, even a former nuclear submarine captain who's now a member of the peace movement. So I knew that by standing there, you can influence people. But he did his utmost to diminish us, to tell us, there's really just two of you. And, I tried to tell him, we're answering a higher moral law. It's Ash Wednesday. We need to be here. And he just made it sound like it was folly. But it occurred to me also that he wouldn't be expending his time and energy doing this if we didn't have an impact. So we stayed there. We refused to move. And he did place us under arrest and put us in the back of his vehicle. We were very surprised to not be handcuffed. He did tell us we were going to jail, but at the very last minute, he turned into the the driveway where most of the nuclear resistors in our group had parked. And he decided to release us there. He issued us citations. I do have to return to Tucson, as well as my colleague. I have to go to court next month to be arraigned and to answer to these charges. We were charged with criminal trespass in the third degree. And if I don't go back, I was told that a warrant will be issued for my arrest. So that's where I'm at now. But I will have an opportunity to tell the judge why I stood there, why we oppose Raytheon's nuclear weapons, and that also, nuclear weapons have been responsible for sickening and killing so many people. One of the reasons that we went there on Ash Wednesday, our Pacific Life community, was to commemorate the anniversary of Castle Bravo nuclear test, which I believe took place in I guess March of when? I think it was the 1940s or 1954. I'm sorry, Bikini Atoll, Castle Bravo, the largest nuclear test that we actually used live nuclear weapons on the Marshall Islands to test them without regard for the lives or well-being of the people who lived there. And indeed, the bikini bathing suit that everybody wears these days, it was actually named after Bikini Atoll. They literally, it's so morbid, they used to celebrate these nuclear tests. And it makes a mockery of any kind of human rights or human dignity when you see how these nuclear tests were promoted and celebrated as something great that was going to be good for humanity and keep us all safe. But yeah, so I mean that was why I chose to risk arrest, and I would do it again in a heartbeat, Regis. It was well worth it. I was expecting to spend the night in prison. I had mentally prepared for it. I was ready for it, and it didn't turn out that way.
Um, wow, I went down to the Marshall Islands and I spent a couple of weeks there when I was working on my second feature documentary, 30 Seconds to Midnight, about the possibility of nuclear war between the United States and Russia. And I learned the whole story about the Bikini Atoll and the bikini bathing suit. And it was disgusting. Uh, they had no regard for the lives of these people, nor the lives of hundreds, maybe thousands of American naval personnel who were exposed to that radiation. They had no idea what was going to happen. And the Marshall Islands, the Marshallese, have been demanding compensation from the United States government for all of the damage and harm and deaths and um, uh, what do you call it? Unborn babies who are deformed. It was really atrocious. Um, Now, I also want to comment on what you were saying about how significant and important it is to get arrested and go to trial. I covered several of these back in Maine, and I have to tell you, I'll send it to you. One of the films that I made, uh, that the judge in Bath, Maine, was sympathetic to Bruce Gagnon and his colleagues who appeared in trial with a pro bono attorney, uh, and he threw it out. And this was a tremendous victory for the freedom of speech, the right to express your conscience openly, and this is why I think it's so important uh, for you to go to trial, to explain to the judge, and if there's a jury, the jury, uh, and hopefully get the coverage that we were able to provide to my good friends up in Maine, uh, that makes it all worthwhile. Uh, I'm really very happy and proud to know you, uh, not for what preceded this show, your analysis about all geopolitical things and what's going on, but as an activist who's placed your life on the line to promote peace in a real concrete way and to give an example to the rest of America that people have to do something to stop the madness. Elizabeth, thanks so much. It's great to see you again. You got to come back. We're going to continue doing analysis on the war in Ukraine, Uncle Donald, and what's going on in the Middle East. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Regis. Thanks for having me on.